Hey everybody. Talk about chapter 20. I'm going to do a share screen here. Pull it up. All right. So we want to spend our time now in chapter 20 talking about how do we assess for human performance. So, what are we trying to do? When we're looking at physical performance, we need to look at the capacity for maximal energy output. What is our muscular strength? What's our coordination and economy of movement? What psychological factors are at play? We need to make sure that we are attempting to test what we want to assess. So if we want to test our aerobic capacity, should we be looking at a maximal vertical jump test? No, they don't line up. So we should stress the same systems required by the sport and activity so that we actually have a measure that's meaningful. If we're looking at assessments and we're trying to do some testing, we need to make sure that the athletes are volunteering for this, that they're not being tested without knowledge. And if there's any potential risks, they absolutely should be made aware. So keep that in mind. So we know that we've talked about the environment, psychological factors, our ability to generate energy output, strength, our coordination, our economy and movement, all are going to affect performance. All right, so we can look at these tests as an ideal and give us some baseline data, but that doesn't necessarily directly translate into performance. So just keep in mind there's things at play here. So why do we want to test an athlete? We need to know what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. It can be baseline. A lot of times we like to see that our vertical jump has gotten better. We're a basketball player who plays post. Like, we want to know that we can jump higher and block more, okay? It also gives us an idea whether we're being actually effective in the training program we looked at. If our training program is geared at increasing VO2 max and we're not seeing that translate with repeat testing, then we know we're not doing what we set out to do. We just might make better decisions when it comes to our training and our nutrition if we see how physiologically we're affecting our exercise. So what won't it do? Again, when we look at simulating sports in a lab, it won't directly translate into performance in a game, okay? But we have to have something tangible and objective to look at, but recognize that you might be training well and testing well, but game time situation may not look at. Our true test is how we actually perform on the field. That's going to be the ultimate test of our athletic success and failures. So these batteries of tests can help, but how you do it there is going to be the thing. We've already talked about physiological variables we're testing should relate to the sport that we're looking at. They should be valid and reliable tests. Again, we've already talked about sport specific. Do them regularly so you can track progress and change. You have to control the procedures. It has to be something that's it can be duplicated and similar. We have to interpret what we're actually seeing. Are we seeing what we think we're seeing? Are we just getting information? Are we actually trying to put that together? The test has to be reliable. It has to be repeatable. Are we better? Are they more reliable if we're testing an experienced athlete? Yes, they're going to be very motivated. They're going to pace themselves. The more familiar you are with the test, the more you can go at your maximal ability level and still have something left. If we're looking at power output, our equipment has to be calibrated. I can tell you that every year, all of my stuff has to be calibrated. Even in my grip strength assessment, my dynamometer has to be sent out and calibrated so that what we're measuring is actually what it is doing. Again, choose a test that's specific. You know, if we're looking at cycling, we should test on a cycling. We should not necessarily choose a treadmill. Same thing if we're looking at runners, you know, why are we assessing them on a bike test? Those are things to look at, you know, can we break up what we're doing and make it work? Direct tests of maximal aerobic power. So VO2 max is going to be our best test for predicting success in an endurance event, okay? Other things are going to be important. We talked about running economy and other stuff, but you know, VO2 max is going to give us a good idea. You know, the most accurate measure of that is going to be direct testing in a lab with open circuit spirometry. Not necessarily our most reasonable, but that would be our most accurate. That would be our gold standard measure. You know, the specificity of training, you know, is specific. Runners on a treadmill, bikers on a bike. Those are all going to be things that we have to look at. You know, when we're looking at protocols to determine VO2 max, we should use large muscle groups, legs versus arms if it's an option. The optimal test length is going to be somewhere to 10 to 12 minutes. We're going to have a 3 to 5 minute warm up. We're going to load wise, stepwise, every 1 to 4 minutes, increase that till we hit maximal load. We're doing that 1 to 4 minutes because we got to hit steady state everywhere. What's our criteria for knowing that we've hit VO2 max? Even if the work rate keeps going up, we're going to see a plateau in VO2. If we're only doing a test that's 10 to 12 minutes, we don't always see that plateau. If we see a respiratory exchange rate of greater than 1.15, if we know our age predicted heart rate max, 220 minus age, so 220 minus 20 years old, is 200. If we're at 190, we know we're probably getting closer. If we have the ability to do blood tests and we knew that our blood lactate is greater than 8 millimoles, we're knowing that we're getting to that VO2 max, all right? So if we start looking at plotting and we look at the incremental increase in work rate, and we see how that oxygen uptake keeps going up until it just stops going up and levels off, we know we're there. If we're looking at a paraplegic athlete and we have to test them with arm exercises, we can look at wheelchair ergometers, we can look at arm ergometers. We know that arms versus legs is not the ideal. So the highest VO2 max with arm exercise is always going to be considered your peak VO2 and not a max rate. Okay, so just make sure terminology wise you understand if we tested arms, we can only test for a peak VO2 max. A higher peak VO2 uses an accelerated protocol. So we know that muscle fatigue is going to play a factor here before we get into the aerobic component. So we're going to start higher because we know that the test is going to have to be shorter. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If we're looking at some different things term-wise, if we say we're looking at peak running velocity, it is the highest speed that can be maintained for more than 5 seconds. Okay, that's going to be your peak running velocity. That lactate threshold is going to be the exercise intensity at which the blood lactate levels begin to systematically increase. That has to be a direct measurement. We might be able to estimate it based on our ventilatory threshold, but if you really wanted to know, it's a blood draw so that we know where we are. Critical power is going to be the speed at which the running speed time curve reaches a plateau, which it can't go any faster and maintain our time, okay? It's going to level out at some point, and that is going to be our critical power. So what do we use lactate threshold for? You know, can we estimate our maximum steady state running speed so we can look at overall and predict performance and success in a running event? Absolutely. So you're going to see a 2 to 5 minute warm up. You're going to keep seeing a bump in that work rate every 1 to 3 minutes. Every work rate, you're going to measure that blood lactate level. and then you're gonna graph it out. And when you see it spike, you know you're there. That vent threshold, like I said, at the point where we're exercising and then all of a sudden we're gonna increase in ventilation, that's gonna be an estimate of where that lactate threshold came into play. So you'll see it here, you know, oxygen uptake keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, and then all of a sudden you're gonna see that direct increase. And that's where we know we've hit that lactate threshold. See how it corresponds here to that vent threshold. You know, as that starts to continue to increase, you're gonna see it spike. They usually occur pretty close together. How do we measure our peak running velocity and effort to predict performance? You know, we test it on a treadmill or a track. Keep increasing the speed. You know, what's the highest speed you can maintain for more than 5 seconds? It's an excellent predictor of 5K run performance. Also is a pretty good predictor at the 10 to 90K. So keep that in mind. Let's do a little visual in your brain right now. Highest speed you can run on a treadmill. What happens when you can't maintain the speed on a treadmill? Do you think you can slow that treadmill down fast enough when we're looking at trying to run as fast as you can for 5 seconds? Or do you think you'll go shooting off the back of it when you fail to maintain? Yeah, so those treadmill belts aren't very long. You will lose them off the back of the treadmill. So recognize that safety is going to be a concern. Some people are skilled enough to do this. Some people are not as skilled to do this. So please just keep that in mind. So again, if we start looking at this running peak velocity and we look at 5K times, you're going to see the higher the speed, the faster they're able to complete the activity. And that stays pretty true to that line. So it does really help with that race performance. Critical power, we talked about that running speed at which the speed curve, time curve reaches a plateau. So we're looking at, you know, what power output can be maintained basically indefinitely. We know we're going to fatigue between 30 and 60 minutes when exercising at critical power, but you know, you're looking at where can you go and just maintain. How do we look at it? We can measure it based on a series of timed exercises, or we're looking at trials to exhaustion. Very good indicator of performance in events lasting anywhere from that 3 to 100 minute mark, and is very correlated to high VO2 max and a higher lactate threshold. So again, you know, what is it? What is the speed that you can just basically maintain forever? That is going to be our critical power. How do I look at exercise economy? Higher economy means less energy is expended to maintain a given speed, right? We look good running. We should be able to run longer and use less, should be less work to run long, okay? So anybody with a higher running economy should defeat a less economical runner. Like it just should. There's different measurements of oxygen costs at running at various speeds. So we will see that those with greater economy have a lower oxygen cost. So again, looking at this graph, do you want to be runner A or do you want to be runner B? You know, which one is it? What do you want to do? You know, oxygen uptake on A is higher than those speeds. But who should last longer? Who do you want to be? Runner A or runner B? Runner B, right? So this YouTube video is one of the links. If you've already started to notice, there are several bounced in YouTube videos that you can stream. So I want you to watch those, watch all of them. I would assume that some of that stuff will be on the test because it would make sense. Estimating our distance running, using it, again, we talked about that lactate threshold and running economy. If we look at a race pace at 5 minutes, meters per minute above lactate threshold, you know, we can look at what kind of performance we would expect in a 10,000 meter race. You know, if we're looking at how long it should take, you know, if we know what those VO2s are and the lactate thresholds, we should be able to make some pretty good estimates on how long it should take to do something. And we need that performance prediction. You know, you need it if you're running and you're in a regular meet. You need it knowing where to track where you are in progress over the season, knowing where you want to, your final competition to be. You know, are you looking at trying to qualify for the conference championships, or are you looking at trying to qualify for nationals? Are you looking at just getting into nationals, or are you looking at competing at nationals? You know, is nationals your end game, or are you trying to get to next level? You know, those are the things that you've got to kind of pay attention to. So if we start to look at that running speed as that energy cost goes up, the faster we move, then you look at, you know, that lactate threshold and where does it occur at. Once you start to plot that stuff out, you'll have a pretty good idea that, you know, that blood lactate is going to shoot up when we get to oxygen uptake around 40. So we know at 40, you know, if we plot that across running speed wise, we know we need to be somewhere under that 200 meters per minute so that we can sustain, right? So those are things to look at, but we always want to have an idea how we're going to do. We always want to know, is this 8-year-old going to be the next best, greatest? No lab test is going to accurately predict ultimate ability. You know, other things are going to be important, but you can't really measure. You know, psychological factors. Do we want to be there? Do kids lose interest in a sport because they were pushed so hard, so early, so young? You can't really predict it. Again, can you give us strengths and weaknesses? Can you look at effectiveness of what we're currently doing? Sure, but can you predict that champion? Not necessarily. So again, if we're looking at anaerobic power, are we looking at the ultra short event? We remember that's up to 10 seconds, or the short term event that we really need to be looking at glycolysis to measure, right? So those are going to be the things that, you know, what is the energy system during the exercise that we're trying to look at? You know, what should we be testing for? So this particular graph that I have up is one that you need to have in your brain. Okay, you know, it's the easiest way to look at the transitions between the energy systems, to see the overlap and to make your best determination on test to complete. So if we're looking at this ATP PC system, you know, what things can we look at? You know, jumping power tests, running power tests, you know, a series of 40-yard dashes with brief recovery. Soccer is going to have some intermittent shuttle tests. There's a cycling power test, the cube back 10-second test. Some of those are videos that you can look at in the chapter and really give you an idea of what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to pause this because apparently my battery is going to die and I wasn't smart enough to know that. So I'm going to stop the share right there and I'm going to pause the recording. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back again. I'm very sorry about that. We're going to go right back to our video. I heard the beep and it was very loud in my ears saying my battery would die. So let's look at this anaerobic power. All right, look at the trials. You know, here's the question. Do you want to be A or B? So I'll give you a second to look at it, see if you choose appropriately. So over the number of trials, B cannot maintain the running speed, right? So we want to be athlete A if we have a choice. But that's something to look at, is how many times can we repeat it? How much can we stay? Okay, you are sharing your screen, good. But why is it, oh, I'm hitting the wrong thing. So there's two videos here. Let's look at both of those. I'm pretty sure they're basically in order when we look at them, but that'll give us some ideas on the actual tests and what they look like and how they translate to in real life. So if we start looking at, you know, that 40-yard dash and we repeat over 3 trials, you know, they're going to categorize. You know, you see the NFL combine, right? You know, you see before the draft what they're able to do. You know, you want to be superior if that's where you're at. But this is one of the ways they start breaking it down and looking at it. If we look at anaerobic glycolysis, one of the best tests for that is going to be the Wingate test. It's a cycling test, You are basically going to pedal as fast as you can for 30 seconds against a predetermined load. That load will be based on you and your body weight. You know, what that peak power is indicative of is your ATP-PC system. You know, how much does it decline? Kind of gives us a really good idea of where we are. Maximal tests, running 200 to 800 meters, sport-specific tests that will give us what that anaerobic short-term glycolic power looks like. So here's an example when we look at that wing gait. It's going to be resistances. So if you weigh 40 kilograms, you know, the resistance setting on that flywheel is going to be 3.25. So it really gives you a pretty good idea of what kind of load you're looking at. If we want to look at maximal force that can be generated by a muscle group, you know, we want to look at isometric strength. We can look at a force dynamometer, you know, where we squeeze and measure grip. Free weights, we can look at dumbbells, barbells, remaining constant. So we can look at a 1 rep max lift, all right? Isokinetic, we talked a little bit about, measures of variable resistance, but we're constanting our speed. Or we can have variable resistance devices over range of motion. So there's lots of different ways to assess the strength. Here's isometric. This is looking at an isokinetic machine, but they've got that locked down. So they're just looking at what is your maximal isometric force during knee extension. You might see this a lot in your post-ACL patients, you know, a measure of the revised knee, you know, what has been surgically fixed should be within 70% of your non-surgical leg, your quote, normal. So a lot of times the release and protocol can't happen from a physician until they've achieved that percentage. So here's 2 more videos to look at some different tests that will give you a really good idea and benchmark of what to look at. There's that dynamometer I talked about. You know, the inside numbers give you pounds and the outside gives you kilograms as far as strength. So just make sure if you're measuring, you are consistent and choosing the right one. You know, here's this isokinetic assessment of knee extension again. You know, looking at controlling the speed, how much can you work against it? The nice thing about assessing these is going to be the computer itself. You know, patients can see, the athlete can see their force over a line of what they want their force to be. Really gives them a good idea. So a lot of times, depending on what the joint angle is at, you know, anywhere from 20 degrees, so just sort of all the way straight to, you know, basically sitting in a chair, you can look at what force is developed there. And there'll be lots of ideals and normatives for age. So again, just more of those links, but all of the links here should be set up as separate tabs, okay? So it gives you a pretty good idea. I really want you to focus on, I want you to focus on watching those videos, you know, putting it together. Those would be things that we would have tried to do as part of collection of information for your exercise prescriptions. So clearly, we can't do it as a group. But that 1 rep max, I want you to watch that video because you're going to need to do it. So we've already talked about, but just to reinforce at this point, you should have been able to do a field test for VO2 max. You should have been able to do your more formal VO2 max assessment. You should be able to do your 1 rep maxes, you know, the exercises and things are on there as far as what you need. You're going to have to figure out where you fit normative wise for age and for gender. That is it's in the ASEM manual, and your focus is going to be on exercise performance, exercise phys, even athletic training. I would recommend that you get the newest version of the ASEM, okay? Because you're gonna need it. It should be 20-some bucks on Amazon, and it will become a Bible for you. For people not going on, I'm not gonna tell you to go ahead and buy it. I am usually have it on, should be on reserve in the library, but that really does not help anybody right now. I will probably go ahead here over the next few days, try and scan in, take some pictures of the data sets so that you can compare where you are. There'll be a flexibility assessment, a Y test you can do to assess your overall flexibility. I usually just bring my box up and test everybody. But again, those aren't necessarily options right now. We'll figure that part out. I'm going to figure that part out. But at this point, normative data, your actual data should exist for field VO2, your formal VO2, and your 1 rep maxes. If we're not able to do 1 rep maxes somewhere, I need you to get in contact with me so we can figure out an alternative so you can look at maximum power. Okay? Fantastic. I'll talk to you soon.